بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. يا ربنا افتح لنا أبواب رحمتك وسهل علينا الطريق إليك ولا تأخذنا بقصورنا وذنوبنا لقد ظلمنا أنفسنا ونعترف على ذنبنا ولا غافل لذنوبنا أنت فنعتمد عليك ونتوجه إليك ونستغفرك ونتوب إليك ونعوذ بك ونصلي ونسلم على الذي أرسلته بالهدى ودين الحق ليبين لنا القرآن. أما بعد, I want to talk about some important points with regard to our reality as Muslims in the West and in general as an Ummah. And they're important because it has a lot to do with our time and our lives and our dignity and our priority and our children and our future. There's been a conversion of the study of Aqida to be turned into an intellectual wrestling match, and at times people may not like what's being said, but I'm going to say it and take responsibility and own it. You know, a culture of intellectual masturbation. Like Imam Dawood Shabazz used to say, who was one of the Imams in the Midwest and specific in Cleveland, Ohio. He was an Imam that was a builder. He was part of the Dar movement. And he was an inheritor of the tradition of Malcolm Shabazz or Malik Shabazz. And he did a lot for the community on the ground. He built schools and employed people, created, housing opportunities, and established a masjid. So he left this dunya with a legacy of making an effort to do something for the Muslims. He brought ulama over here, who eventually educated others. So all of that is on his scales. That's what we know to be an Imam. That's a model Imam. He used to use that term intellectual masturbation to talk about how a lot of us are stuck in our heads and we take pleasure in tossing around ideas. We take pleasure in tossing around ideas. We take pleasure in going back and forth with each other, and it amounts to nothing on the ground. It's unfortunate that we have amongst the Mashaykh, the PhDs, the Tullab al-Ilm, an orientation which is one of continued debate. And even in the midst of a pandemic, which requires a degree of sensitivity and it requires a degree of working with the people hands-on, we find that we're dragged as a community into a series of talks that amount to madness and a repetition and a rehashing of the same issues that have been talked about and debated over and over again, which shows that we have to question, is this stuff being done for following and ratings and to bring controversy and to flex what one knows, or to try to enforce one's point? The reality of the situation is that the situation is that as people that are involved with knowledge, what I've seen from the ulama is to be able to distinguish between what the people need and what it is that they don't need. And this is one of the reasons why ilm munqasim ila fard al-kifaya wa fard al-ayn. There's knowledge which is divided into a collective responsibility, meaning that some people in the community should have that knowledge and it's not necessary for all of us to know. And then there's knowledge which we all need to know. And part of that knowledge that we all need to know is not just the issue of the fundamentals of Aqidah, but we have to know when to open up themes and topics and when not to open up themes and topics. This is a dilemma that we can't see where our community is at the moment, and we're engaging in a constant war of ideas over who Allah is, over where Allah is, over what constitutes shirk, over what doesn't constitute shirk. So then you have to ask, over the last 25, 30 years, what was happening in the community? And if the point is pitched to say that, well, the community was not, the community is still in need of learning Tawheed, then we have to say, well, you failed at your job and you should be fired. Because many of you that were in movements that pushed this, that has been the conversation for the last over 2 decades now. The issue that Tawheed is the priority. So if we're still confused on issues of Tawheed as a community and we're not able to move to other issues like building, then we're not on the minhaj of the Salaf. We're not on the minhaj of the Sahaba. And it's the same thing we find with the Ash'ari brothers. They've discovered, many of them were Salafis, they became Ash'aris, and they discovered the whole concept of philosophizing and Aqidah and rationality and reason because they were deprived of that earlier on, because they were learning from brothers who really were not ulama, or they were learning from ulama that were not people that have breadth in their knowledge. And so now they figured that they can reason. They got burnt out in that approach, and now they're doing the same thing. Everybody doesn't have to know the details of rational proofs as they were articulated in the past. Matter of fact, if we were serious about the issue of ilm al-kalam, which up to now with my limited knowledge, I have not seen the contemporary scholars who are working on contemporary issues being put to the fore. What we're seeing is polemics. In all due respect to Dr. Saeed Foda, who's actually engineering by training and came into Islamic sciences in a secondary manner. You know what I'm saying? Specifically, ilm al-kalam. He is a polemicist. He has an anti-Salafi edge, and he was not a good choice to translate his books, which shows another set of problems. That the people that are doing translating, and they translate traditional works, they create an environment which continues the same energy and affairs that we had prior to. Meaning that we went through a whole struggle in this community, in the US specifically. My business is not the UK and other places. And where Aqidah was constantly being debated. And that became a point that people calmed down on. And so then we have translators that come and they publish books to the opposite of the Salafi Aqidah. They just are refutations of where the Salafis were at. And that shows that the pedagogy, the repertoire in terms of people's educational methodology is extremely limited. And I'll put it to you in other terms. That means that the different teaching styles and methodologies to give people information, that can be available to us are not being practiced and are very limited, when we look at what people have. People just don't have teaching skills on a number of different levels. They're not in education. And so everybody, just because you go to study doesn't mean that you're in the position to educate others on what you study. You know what I'm saying? There's particular educational goals, and we have a community that is intellectually broken. And a lot of work has to be done to cognitively restructure their mindset so that they understand how to deal with religion properly. And these are people that were born Muslim, and these are people that have been Muslim for a very long time. But the logic that they have is a logic which is very dangerous. It's an either or logic. It's a logic of you're either with me or you're against me, very black and white. And it doesn't matter whether if they're Sufi or they're Salafi. they will still continue to hold that same underlying logical structure, and any argument that you put in their mind will be, processed through that filter. And there's a logic which has done nothing for this community except to divide it. And so many are scared to talk out against these trends for fear of popularity, or fear of losing popularity, or fear of being invited, or fear of losing a check, whatever it may be. But this stuff is extremely toxic. It's extremely toxic on multiple levels. And so it's disheartening. I was in a meeting with a bunch of Muslims that are professionals that are working in the community doing service-oriented stuff. And that group is speaking completely different about community needs, about the lack of funding, about where the Ummah is at, about the breakdown, about how to address practical issues. And then we have those who are supposed to be, experts in knowledge. They're on a whole different platform. You know what I'm saying? Debating issues which don't need to be debated. And sometimes we have to let certain things go so that we don't give it more attention. Right. And then, that's just the reality. Unfortunately, I love and I respect Dr. Yasir Qadhi for the sake of Allah. But Dr. Yasir Qadhi needs to reorient himself. His priorities as far as educating the community are off. He's delving into a lot of topics which belong in an academic circle, not in the general public or leaked out to the general public. And he needs to discuss those issues within that framework rather than embroiling the whole of the community in madness. And the people that refute him and go after him fall into the same problem. People say, well, aren't you doing the same thing? No, I'm not doing the same thing. I'm not doing the same thing. I'm saying we need a new paradigm. We need to get rid of the mentality completely. And we need to marginalize that type of discourse. Because what's happening in the meantime is that we're losing the youth, right? And we have tons of divorce cases, and we don't have any way to address it because our environments of knowledge and our environments of scholarship and our masajid and our online media platforms are all full of problems that have to do with debates that have no direct benefit to the people, because majority of the people don't know what the heck y'all talking about. You know what I'm saying? And so this is the dilemma that we face at hand. The dilemma that we face is that there's a massive disconnect between those who are studying, those who have studied, those who have specialized in a particular area, and the needs of the people. And so then how is that imitating the methodology of the scholars of Islam, whether it's Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, whether it's Imam al-Juwayni or al-Ghazali, whoever you want to say, pick your poison. You understand what I'm saying? When the ulama wrote, they wrote according to the needs of the people, what it was that they needed. And when they wrote on theoretical levels, you know what I'm saying, it was something that was generally known to be an address to the ulama. But there's a known reality in Islamic knowledge that all levels of knowledge are not the same. And there's some things that are for certain circles and some things that are not for other circles. And that same knowledge that is for specialized circles is not for a general public. And it's not that we hide knowledge. It's that people are not prepared for those discussions, or they don't even need those discussions in their lives. People are worried about, their jobs. They're worried about their paperwork. They're worried about what the meaning of Tawheed is in that reality, and having to trust Allah during a time when people around them are dying. You know what I'm saying? And for their rizq, and for healing, and for helping them with their families. You have tons of single mothers. We have a series of social problems, which if people want to talk about deen is not philosophy. And nobody is going to pull that cloth over my eyes in that regard and try to pass that off. I'm a student of philosophy. I studied philosophy like 20-something years. I have a specialized degree in philosophy. Deen is not philosophy. Deen is about impact in people's lives. Are there some sciences which are philosophical? Yes. But there's a difference between the philosophers and the prophets. There's a difference between Athens and Jerusalem and Mecca. You understand what I'm saying? If we want to talk about prophethood. And so, we have this wrong. We have turned the Aqida studies the Salafis and the Asharis and others into philosophical debate. And this is why Imam Ibn Rushd, rahmatullahi alayhi, he was against the whole issue of ilm al-kalam coming into the public. Imam al-Ghazali, rahmatullahi alayhi, waged a criticism at the mutakallimun, how they lost their way in the original purpose when it came to issues of Aqidah. And this is why essentially Imam al-Ghazali focused on the issue of personal relationship with God. And Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, rahmatullahi alayhi, he focused on ensuring that people were rooted in the book and the sunnah to understand that certainty comes from that. Yeah, in a way that anybody can understand whatever orientation that they're at, that they can have confidence in the Quran and the sunnah, and so that their minds are removed from a constant doubting in the deen. But what we are doing is detrimental to our community, and it will be marked in history as foolishness. It will be marked in history as a community that didn't have a sense of priorities, right? And so what that does, instead of allowing us to create an environment and conditions which we can build community and assist people in their growth process, what we do is we displace people more and more and more and more, until the point that they become frustrated with the deen and they become mentally exhausted, and then they, out of their own struggles, give up on Islam and they move on, because at the end of the day, the arguments from the other camps are more strong. You understand what I'm saying? We're not producing high-level scholarship. We're still talking about low-level issues that are low-level. And people are debating about this stuff like it's some grand, detailed philosophical issue. Are y'all nuts with this stuff? You know what I'm saying? This is why people begin to read Western philosophers, Western thinkers that are more systematic, that are more worked out, and they become convinced of that, and they just abandon what was being passed off as scholarship. The reality of the situation is that what's going on in the Muslim community is really tragic. And so you have a confusion between academics and scholarship and polemics, and low-level knowledge. There's a confusion between all of those different areas, and in the meantime, while that confusion dominates, there is a neglect of the need of the people. There's a clear neglect of the need of the people. And so we have to ask them, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of revelation at this point? That's what I would like to know. You know what I'm saying? What is the purpose of revelation? Is the purpose of revelation to help us to understand how to live life? Or is it to just sit around and debate about religious ideas? And someone has to, these are dialogues that we need to have. We need to stop tolerating this type of stuff. If people are really serious about issues, that are academic, then why don't they sit down and write some well-grounded research papers, and then call a conference between people that want to sit and focus on that, rather than embroil the whole community in some sort of pseudo-intellectualism and counter-refutation. And that's where the Muslims are at. This is why we're losing on multiple fronts. And in the meantime, while that's the case, you have Yemen that is collapsed. You have Syria that's collapsed. From my understanding, we're about to get a whole series of new refugees with trauma. And our communities are not prepared for that. Rather than building up people to rebuild the Ummah, what we're doing is collapsing people and preoccupying them with issues that are wrong. And this is where the people involved in scholarship are wrong. You understand what I'm saying? And we've talked about the professional community, but those of us who are involved in knowledge, this is where we are wrong. This is why we don't have leadership in the community, because we don't have a sense of priority, and we don't have a sense of what's practical and what needs to be done. And this is why we can't stand on our own 2 feet, and we are not leaders in our own organizations, because we have not grasped this concept of practicality. As a matter of fact, this is why Trump won the election and others didn't, because Trump was able to understand how to speak to the base of the people and motivate them and move them, and that allowed for him an opportunity to come into power and make a move. What he did with it after that was all on his own, responsibility. But, imams and ulama and others, you will never have a place with the people if you continue like that. This is guaranteed, almost at the level of yaqeen. You understand what I'm saying? If not ghalabat al-dhann, when you look at, for instance, Sheikh Abul Hassan Nadwi, he did a series of studies on people that it was attributed to them that they were people of tajdeed, they were people of revival of the deen. All of them have one concept in common. They walked with the people. When bid'ah came into the community, and when the ummah started to go into decline, is when the ulama left walking with the people. Then the people didn't have access to knowledge. The ulama didn't have access to the needs of the people, and there was a fissure or a gap between the knowledge and the people in practice. And that's where we're at. This is where we're at. And so people are having all kinds of doubts. You're opening up Aqida issues which most people are not even prepared to deal with intellectually. And they run around babbling like they know what they're talking about. You know what I'm saying? And that's the dilemma. And it forces others to counter, and it forces others to come out. But this environment is not a good educational environment. This environment is not one with which we have a sense of priorities. Our priorities are off. Details, issues at this point in time are not the priority. Yeah, and they're made into the priority because people are speculating and they're throwing out ideas into the community. May Allah guide Dr. Yasir. We love him for the sake of Allah, but there's just, you have to reel certain things in. This is getting to a point where the community is being embroiled every other day into some new intellectual venture. And we admire the fact that there's an openness of mind and there's intellectual prowess and this and that, but it's not the time and the place. You know what I'm saying? That belongs in the academic setting, in a certain type of specialized atmosphere. It doesn't belong in the general public because the general public doesn't even know how to deal with that. We have people that will immediately mistake certain things which are scholarship for kufr, and it has already happened. It has happened on other occasions in which other things were mentioned. And so it's sad that this is where we're at. You understand what I'm saying? That's why tulab al-ilm, you cannot be arrogant. You can't bypass the people. You can go deep in your knowledge, but you always have to stay connected to the people. And we have seen some of the greatest scholars of today's time. That's exactly what they did. They had the ability to still articulate at the level of the people. And this is not easy. It's not easy because you learn a language and you expand out on it and you learn complicated ideas. And now you have to reel in and figure out how it is that you're going to teach the people. And that's the process, of knowledge. And when it comes to a circle of completion. So I leave you with that, people, that we have to go back to some points of simplicity. The Prophet ﷺ spoke at a level, which the advanced and the person that was preoccupied with other things in his life other than language and all of these types of things can understand. And so he spoke at multiple levels. يعني خطب الناس على قدر عقولهم, as the hadith indicates too. And so, alayhi salatu wasalam, we have to understand that everybody's not at the same level of capacity intellectually. Doesn't belittle them in their dignity, but it's just a reality. Everybody's not prepared in the same way. We have to, as students of knowledge, as mashaykh, as imams, as academics, whatever, we have to have a grasp of how to deal with the general public. We can't afford to lose the general public, especially the youth and the people and the new converts and so on and so forth. And it takes skill from us. That's where we're deficient. The professionals have their own deficiencies, and we have our own deficiencies, and that's one of them that we have left walking with the people. And we have cultivated and generated and perpetuate a culture of debate, and it continues, and to the point where it has enveloped this community and it knows no better. And it's across the groups. It's across the groups. It's not one group. It's across the groups. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.